Today I'm going to talk to you about preparing a surface for painting, so stick around. This is a really basic video, and if you're just beginning painting, this is for you. Stay tuned, I'm going to tell you how to do it next. If you're new here, my name is Paige and I'm the Chief Pixel Pusher and Paintbrusher over at Gumption, and I'm really excited today to teach you this basic lesson in preparing your surface, whether that's a canvas or a panel, for painting. And we're going to be using some different kinds of prep methods for this. First and foremost, if you are using a raw panel, like often I am using raw panels, I'm going to direct you to this link up here for the very first prepping stages that I use, but this video has already been created by Trikel, and I think it's a very in-depth, excellent video to get you prepared when you're using raw wood. Today's video is all about gesso or using grounds for watercolor. There's even a pastel ground that you can go ahead and put on a surface. So we're going to be exploring that. I'm going to show you my technique for how I do it, and it's really simple and easy and not too expensive. So let's do it now. To get started, you're going to need a canvas or a panel, a substrate to put your gesso on. You're going to need a wide flat brush, whether it's a regular brush or one of those sponge brushes. You're going to need gesso. You're going to also need sanding blocks or sanding paper, and you're going to need tape, either masking or painter's tape. This will get you started. Please note these panels have been shellacked and have 2 layers of gesso on them at the point that we start our video. Here you can see that I have taped off the edges very carefully, if my camera will focus here, with masking tape. So this is where I do not want to get gesso on my edges. I want to preserve the wood. And you don't have to do this if you choose to paint your edges, but I like to have clean. I love to have as much wood showing through as possible. Here's a painting that I've been working on, and I have taped this around the edges. Now I really try to make sure that the tape is even with the painting, but sometimes the tape will create a little bit of a lip. So if that's the case, when you're putting on your gesso or whatnot, you really want to try to have it below, because it will kind of pool the paint if you're not careful. This way I have protected this piece of artwork so the edges are nice and clean, but it looks professional when I take the tape off. So this is my gesso brush. I have one brush specifically for this purpose. Now if you use the sponge brushes, they won't leave marks in your gesso as much. Here I'm showing you some watercolor grounds. These you can use on wood or other surfaces, canvas, to create a ground for a watercolor painting. So this works very much the same as gesso does. Here is just some regular old gesso. This is for acrylic painting. You can use it for oil painting as well. There's black, white, and transparent. Golden also makes grounds for pastels as well. So just note that. You can do a little research and see for your particular medium if there's a ground if you need one. Next, I use sanding blocks. This is 100 grit, one's a 220 grit. Between layers, I use these sanding blocks. And of course, you can use regular old tape or painter's tape, whatever you've got handy. I have 2 layers down on these panels. You can see where I have some brush marks there, so that might be when it is beneficial to use one of those flat spongy brushes that you can get just about anywhere. Here we're going to start sanding these down, and really we're just sanding them so the surface is smooth, and I kind of work in a circular motion, up and down, sideways, just to make sure they're smooth. We're not trying to take off the surface. Here, as you can see, I'm using a little bit of gesso and I'm spreading it. I'm using my brush vertically, and then I'll move it horizontally just to make sure I can get that gesso everywhere. Sometimes you'll have to add a little bit more. And then finally, at the final stage, I'll pick a direction. Here I'm going vertically to have my brush strokes go one way, and then the next time I will go horizontally after this layer is dry. You want to make sure that you clean out your brushes every time that you put gesso on your canvas. You do not want to ruin your brushes. Here you can see I'm going horizontally now. I might go vertically just to spread this gesso just a little bit, but we will finalize it with a horizontal painting motion. As a good rule of thumb, I would use 3 to 4 layers of gesso. Another important thing to keep in mind is we want those layers to dry. So this doesn't have to be done over a few days, but if you have time and you kind of prep your canvases in advance, it's good to do that so you can make sure that those layers really do dry in between, and then you don't have a bunch of wet paint and wet gesso on top of one another. Even prep these, and even if you just leave them overnight, I think that gives you quite a bit of time to let them dry. I usually kind of prep them and work on something else, and then by that time when I'm ready to work on those panels, they're good to go. So oftentimes you think of watercolor paper, stretching watercolor paper, but there are new grounds out that are available for you to paint on wood or canvas or whatever you want with watercolor. Now, it doesn't react the same as paper, so that's something you really need to keep in mind when you are using these grounds. Initially, it can be kind of frustrating because it lifts in a different way on canvas than it does on paper. Ultimately, paper is the king of all watercolor substrates. There are 2 watercolor grounds that I know of. One is this Core Watercolor Ground, and the other is this Daniel Smith Watercolor Ground. And they come in, different kinds of colors for the watercolor ground. This one happens to be a transparent watercolor ground because that's what I was really shooting for when I got this. And they're both great. They can act a little bit differently. Sometimes one is a little more hot press like, and the other is more cold press like. This one is a little bit more like hot press. It has less texture. And this one might be a little bit more like cold press. Both are great. I know that Trekell specifically uses this one to prep their panels. You can actually buy prepped panels already from Trekell Art Supplies. And I happen to think that I like this one a little bit more just because I feel like it works with my style a little bit better. Really, it's a personal choice. You may even find that you don't like using watercolor grounds. The one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're using these grounds, if you're using a transparent ground, you're dealing with a different set of circumstances when you're painting in watercolor. We're so used to using that white of the paper, and it really creates vibrant watercolors. When you use something that's like wood in the background, it creates a very different feel when you're using watercolor. So keep that in mind. Hey, if you like this video and you got something out of it, give me a thumbs up or subscribe if you like my content. I'm always trying to share different stuff that I have learned over the years, and my goal is to help you make that creative journey just a little more fun. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time, have an awesome day and keep being creative, and I will see you later.